This video is about solving quadratics and talking about the four different methods. So we're going to talk about solving them using square roots, solving them by factoring, solving them by completing the square, and then last by using the quadratic formula. So I'm going to do an example of each of those different methods. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is solving it by taking square roots. And basically what you're going to do here is you're just going to solve the equation for the variable. So in this case, I'm going to solve for x. So I want to get the x squared by itself. So I see multiplication, so I'm going to do division using opposite operations to get the variable by itself. And now I have x squared equals 48. And now to solve for x, you take the square root. So the square root of x squared is x. And whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So I take the square root of both sides. This is going to be an irrational number, so it's a decimal that continues on forever and ever. And I'm going to round it to the nearest thousandth. And so x equals, when you put this in your calculator, you get 6.928 rounded to the nearest thousandth. But don't forget, with square root, there's a positive answer and a negative answer. So those are the two solutions. So one of the solutions to this quadratic is positive 6.928, and the other solution is negative 6.928. All right, so don't forget that. And also, just a quick review, what you're finding are the x-intercepts of the graph of this quadratic. That's what the solutions are to a quadratic. All right, so let's look at an example of solving one by factoring. All right, so the first thing you do if you're going to solve it by factoring is put it in standard form. I'm going to put this in standard form. If you don't know what standard form is, it's ax squared plus bx plus c. So I'm going to move the negative 8r to the other side by adding 8r to both sides. So plus 8r plus 8r. And so what I end up with is r squared plus 8r plus 7 equals 0. So now what I'm going to do is factor this. So how do you know if you should use factoring to solve it? Well, look at what you have, and if it's not easily factored, then that means you want to use a different method. Okay, so this, when I look at this, I'm thinking what two numbers multiply to 7 and add to 8? And that would be 7 and 1. So this factors to r plus 7 times r plus 1 equals 0. So what that means is either r plus 7 could be 0 or r plus 1 could be 0, because when you multiply these together, at least one of them has to be 0 for the product to be 0. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this into two equations. And one equation is going to be that r plus 7 is equal to 0, and the other one is going to be that r plus 1 is equal to 0. And now I just solve these. So I subtract 7 from both sides, and I get my first solution, which is r equals negative 7. I subtract 1 from both sides on this one. When I say both sides, I mean both sides of the equal sign. And there's my other solution. So that's the solutions to that quadratic using factoring. All right. The next one is completing the square. So when you're completing the square, it to be in the format ax squared plus bx plus c. So put in this form. So that means I'm going to add 101 to both sides. So plus 101 plus 101. So now I have p squared plus 8p equals 98. And now what we're going to do is complete the square. Complete the square. And the way that we do that is by adding b over 2 squared to both sides. So we're going to add b over 2 squared to both sides of this equation. And so b over 2, this is the a value, which is 1. The b value is b. This is your c value. So I'm going to do 8 over 2 to the second power. That's 4 to the second power, which is 16. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides of this. And this is called completing the square. All right, now after I do that, I end up with p squared plus 8p plus 16 equals 114. All right, so now what I want to do is factor the left side of this. Two numbers that multiply to 16 and add to 8. So that would be 4 and 4. And so it's p plus 4 times p plus 4, which factors to p plus 4 squared. P plus 4 times p plus 4 would be this. And now we're going to take the square root of both sides. Square root of both sides. So here we go. Square root. And so now I have p plus 4 equals the square root of 14. If I round it to the nearest thousandth, would be positive negative. Sorry, that's 100. I was like, something's not right here. Positive negative 10.677. All right, now I'm going to split this. And so I have p plus 4 equals positive 10.677, and p plus 4 equals negative 10.677. And now we're going to solve these. So minus 4, minus 4. So that gives me p equals 6.677. That's a plus sign there. Minus 4, minus 4. P equals negative 14.677. That's a 7, I promise. And there's your two solutions. So that's called completing the square. All right. The last method is using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is something that you need to memorize. So the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2a. So the first thing I'm going to do here is put this in standard form. So put in standard form. And so that means I'm going to subtract this from both sides and subtract this from both sides. Minus 2x minus 23. And so I end up 3x squared minus 2x minus 23 equals 0. So my A value is the coefficient of x squared, which is 3. My B value is the coefficient of x, which is -2. And my C value is equal to -23. And now I'm going to plug these in to the formula. So plug into the formula. There we go. So negative b just means the opposite of b. So b is -2, so I'm going to put +2. Plus or minus the square root b squared, so that's -2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is -23. And that whole thing is over 2 times a, so 2 times 3. And now I'm just going to start simplifying this until I have what's under the square root completely simplified. So I'll have 2 plus or minus the square root of -2 times -2 is 4, plus, because you have a minus and a negative, that's going to make a plus here, and 4 times 3 times 23 would be 276. And that's all over 6. So I'm almost done with simplifying it. So 2 plus or minus the square root of 280 over 6. And now at this point, I'm going to split it into my two expressions. So here we go. So the first one I have is 2 plus the square root of 280 over 6. And the other one I have is 2 minus the square root of 280 divided by 6. And so what you want to do is you want to do this whole thing in your calculator and then round the answer. So don't do the square root and round it and then do the rest of this. You want to do 2 plus the square root of 280, then hit equals in your calculator, and then divide that sum by 6. And then you want to round that answer. And so the first answer I get is 3.122. And this one comes out to -2.456. So there you go. There's the 4 methods. So hopefully that was helpful to you. If so, give it a like and a subscribe, and feel free to leave me a comment. Until next time.